There's Richard Thompson. Okay,
Can you hear us?
He's connecting to audio.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Richard Thompson.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, can you see me? You can see it. I'm good, thanks. Sorry, I was having some technical issues there. It just seems to be.
It's the 21st century, Richard. 21st century.
Oh, God, it can't be, really?
Yes. Anyway, good morning. You're in London today, yes? You're in London?
Yes, I'm in London, yes. And good, so good morning to you. Good afternoon to me.
Good morning.
Yes,
okay,
indeed.
we're in London. We're in London.
London, Hampstead.
Oh, okay, all right. Very good.
Yeah, northwest.
David is in a place called Connecticut.
I've heard of that.
Yes,
there are stories about that.
Close but far away. As a matter of fact, I wanted to tell you, back in 1969, I think it was, you guys were playing Alice Tully Hall, which was part of a Lincoln Center. And I grew up about 3 blocks from there. So I want to thank you very much for having your gig so conveniently located to my my apartment.
Well, anytime.
Yeah. And then, oddly enough, I think it was like the late 80s or early 90s, you played up in Nyack at, you did a solo show at Ellen Hayes Theater. Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I was living about 4 miles from there at the time. So it's been wonderful.
Well,
so if you come to Connecticut, I'm in Litchfield County.
Yeah, okay.
So
okay, well, I'm following you as closely as I can.
Yes.
Anyway. Okay, anyway.
I'll get to your house eventually. I'll be doing a concert in your house.
Oh, that would be wonderful, actually.
Right, you're in the exact same room there. Well, let's start. I have to, full disclosure, I am actually part of the Richard Thompson legacy, as it is. In 1989, my band recorded what I feel is the definitive version of She Twists the Knife Again, which we all remember from this record, right? Across a Crowded Room.
Yep, sure.
And I think I got the mechanical from Harry Fox Agency, right? If I remember correctly. And judging by our album sales, I think, Richard, you probably got somewhere between $25 and $30 in royalties. So
that's not bad. That beats, Spotify any day of the week.
Yeah, well, it did. The record company did put it on Spotify. So I would say in another 30 years, you'll probably get another $30 from that.
Give it 30 years, yeah, at least.
Anyway, and I see. Do you still have the sports jacket from the album shoot there?
No, that was whatever happened to that jacket? That was a good jacket. Damn.
You don't get to keep the albums. You don't get to keep the jackets from the album shoots, I guess.
Well, that was actually mine. Sometimes you do. So sometimes they'll let you keep the clothes. It depends. They've got stingier lately with that stuff. They used to do it all the time, but now you have to really negotiate, or they give you a deal. That's about as good as it gets, unless you're Lady Gaga or something. Which clearly I'm not.
And I'm sure the meat would obviously spoil by 2 or 3 weeks after she was wearing it. So
anyway, go ahead. Well, let's talk about the book first, of course, and then we'll talk about the bass players, because David and I are bass players, and we make note of all the bass players on your records here. David, you got to hear this one.
Bass players on my records.
Oh, I have that one. Yeah.
That's Jerry Chef on there. We got to talk about that. And of course, you have both Danny Thompson and Jerry Chef on this one, right? That's You, Me, Us, right? You have that.
Yeah.
Put it there, pal. That's going to be another remake. I'm going to do that there. But when we read this fascinating book, which I read on the Kindle, it seems that Fairport Convention, your career coincided with really a transformation in pop culture. When rock and roll became rock, and it wasn't just an art form for teenagers. It became an art unto itself, in a sense.
I think that's true, yeah. Well, rock and roll was seen as something fairly expendable, something that wouldn't last very long. It will burn out pretty quick. As kids, grew up and got sensible and got decent haircuts, and I went into real jobs like accountancy and banking.
Right.
Thank God that didn't happen. But you know, at some point, rock and roll became more intelligent, and I think probably the watershed was something like the Birds doing Mr. Tambourine Man or something. You know, it was intelligent lyrics coming into popular music, and I think then you could call it rock.
Right.
Then it became this other thing, and that was kind of a mixed blessing, because you know, rock also was this sort of umbrella term for a lot of pretentious music. You know, a lot of glam rock and progressive stuff that was a little self-indulgent, and a lot of metal that was very self-parodying. That was all called rock. So I don't know if I sit comfortably in the world of rock. I think I'm kind of a folk rocker, really.
David, are you there, David?
Yeah, I'm here.
And I quite like, if people accuse me of rock, I say I'm folk. And that makes sense. Yeah, okay.
It does. Yeah. But again, it was a fertile time when the boundaries were really being erased. You know, your contemporaries, Frank Zappa, Jimi Hendrix, Soft Machine. It seems like in those, it was still, the record industry was still the wild, wild west in that sense.
Well, it was. It's nice when it is that way. It's nice when, you know, there's lots of different genres going on. It's nice when record labels are confused and don't know who to sign. You know, these are the good moments in popular music, when you know, creativity flows and the business is lagging behind.
Right.
And the bad times are where people have got the audience figured out, and they figured out exactly the tempo, you know, the song should be at, you know, the kind of the structure. I mean, a bit like kind of modern Nashville, I suppose, really, where it's so formulaic. There are good times, and I think you know, the mid '60s in the UK was one of those times when it was just very creative, and the business was scrambling to catch up with that.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because you know, in your book you talk about how and I don't think I've ever heard anyone mention Hap Sash and the Colored Coat in print ever.
Why would they?
Exactly. Well, I actually had the record.
Good grief.
Yeah, well, you know, it was the cover. See, that was the other thing. There was some great, and weren't they originally an art group before they, you know, tried to be musicians? Isn't that how that?
Yes, they were. And yeah, they were an art group. They did other people's album covers. They did clothes. So I would expect them to have a good album cover. I wouldn't expect the music to be anything special, but I would expect them to be visually very engaged.
Yes, yes. And what I found interesting is, you know, in the book, you talk about Floyd, Soft Machine, Fairport, all doing the same gigs. And there was such a wonderful moment where there were no compartmentalized, oh, this is rock, this is blues, this is this is that. And I think it created a very interesting scene, as you said before.
Yeah, I don't know if all that came from Bill Graham. Maybe it did. You know, but perhaps that filtered across the Atlantic. Yeah, you know, Bill Graham would do these bills that would always be very eclectic. He'd have like a a jazz band, and he'd have a blues guy solo or something, and then he'd have Jefferson Airplane or the Dead. You know, he'd really mix up the genres and the bills, and maybe that spirit came across. You know, to the UK in '66, '67. It's possible.
Right, he would put Miles Davis on the same bill. Yeah. Miles Davis on a bill with Steve Miller, which you would not normally think of.
Well, I think one of the strangest bills I saw it was If opening for Rod Stewart and Faces, who were opening for Black Sabbath on their very first. I don't think you could get much wilder.
That's a strange one. The Phil Maurice that I saw, Albert King open for Chuck Berry, open for the Who, and that was pretty strange. There's a kind of logic to that, but it was almost like you know, it should have been reversed or something. It was just a strange, strange billing. But Yeah, so that was that. You know, we had that spirit in the UK, and it was wonderful because audiences were open-minded or just drugged, and you know, you could be on a bill with almost anybody, and there were large bills in those days. You know, there were clubs that would have, you know, 5, 10 bands on a night. There were universities that would book 10, 20 bands a night.
Right.
So there's lots of work as well. That was the other thing that was a great help to Fairport was the minute that we became a professional band, there was tons of work. We could play 7 nights a week if we wanted to. It was that good. So that was a great launching pad for us.
Now, just to fast forward 50 years, there's really no record industry as you knew it, as we knew it anymore. With streaming, an artist can go directly to an audience. You don't have to go through the machinations of advertising in a record company. In essence, the artist has all the power in his or her hands. Could we perhaps see in the digital era a renaissance like you experienced with Fairport in the 60s? Is that a possibility, do you think?
Ooh, it's a possibility. I'd love to think that there could be more live music. I would think that that will be the basis of a revival like that. Not just like a YouTube revival, but you know, but an actual lots more people playing. You know, even if it's just more open mics and you know, cafe, you know, acoustic gigs. It'd be wonderful to just to see more live music as we had it in the 60s. You know, I think Spotify is actually the ideal model in many ways for audiences to reach the artist and vice versa. The only problem is it just pays shit. If artists got properly recompensed for the streams, then that would be wonderful. That would be just great. If artists could make a living from their intellectual property, wouldn't that be great?
Yeah. Well, I think we could almost say as a benefit from the pandemic, in essence, Sweetwater just sold about $1 billion worth of musical instruments during the last 14, 15 months. And that,
wow.
Yeah, but that could be actually, it could be a good thing that people are actually buying real instruments. And perhaps that's a precursor to something like, maybe 5 years from now, 6 years, however many years, where things get back to, I guess we call it a new normal. What is it? We interviewed Ron Carter on Monday. He calls it the COVID intermission. And perhaps something.
Yeah. Optimistically, yes, I agree. I think the fact that many people are consuming instruments in that way is wonderful. I hope that they'll be consuming, you know, trombones and pedal steel guitars and classical harps and all kinds of other things as well. I hope it's not just guitars and keyboards. I hope other things get noticed as well. And basses, of course. We must have basses. Where would the world be without basses?
But, well, actually, you could even say that is starting to happen. You see the popularity of Mumford and Sons, which definitely come from a folk tradition, and the Luminaires, Jason Isbell. I mean, I would think that young people would maybe go back and look at Fairport, Matty Pryor, Nick Drake, Steel Eye Span. Nick Drake had a tremendous resurgence here thanks to an automobile commercial. So, you know, and then of course Fairport is almost now like a Philharmonic because Fairport still plays. They're, dare I say, an institution. You know.
They are an institution. It's true. Not something we ever wanted to contemplate, but I think the reality is that it's you know, it's a multi-generational band now, and I can envisage no original members. I can envision all the original members being dead and their kids or other people carrying on the tradition. I think that's probably a good thing.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I see it that way myself. And but so many wonderful stories in the book. One of my favorites is your Paul McCartney story, where you didn't go to his birthday party.
Yeah.
Recall that one?
Yeah. Well, you know, I was just a snob, really. I thought the Beatles were sort of a pop band, and I was more interested in other things. Yeah, for me, it wasn't cool to go to Paul McCartney's party. It's just a, you know, inverted snobism. If he asks me again, I'll go. If he asks me to his 80th, I'll turn up.
You know, and then of
He
course,
didn't take it too personally.
and then of course, I love this the anecdote of you peeking in Joni Mitchell's notebook.
Yeah, that was sort of, you know, artistic research, let's say. I'm always interested in method, you know, in creative people's method. Not that you can really find out about their creativity from it, but you can find out everything around that creativity. You know, I love to know, you know, how people write, how people work, what hours people work, all that kind of stuff fascinates me. So I probably stepped too far in taking a peek at Johnny's notebook. But it was interesting, and I think in the book I compare it to Sandy's notebook.
Right.
As being, you know, very, very similar, you know, but very, very sort of visually creative as well as musically creative and lyrically creative. Just, yeah, you know, creative people are interesting to me.
I had a quick question regarding, it seems that so many musicians were going to art school back then. And was that basically because, you know, you had to go to some sort of a school, but you didn't want to really take any quote unquote courses, if you know what I mean?
Yes, I think that's true. For those of a non-scholarly bent, the art school was a kind of an opt-out, I suppose. And there were a lot of them. I don't know why, but you know, post World War II, that there were lots of art schools in the UK, and Mrs. Thatcher closed down most of them. Thank you, Mrs. T, for doing that. But at the time, I mean, you had Ray Davis, who was a couple of years ahead of my sister at Hornsey Art College. Eric Clapton, so some of the other Yardbirds as well, I think. A lot of people from the folk scene were at art school. Yeah, it was like a stepping stone, you know, or a way of avoiding having to make decisions at 18 years old. You could postpone it another 3 years before you had to confront the world. And obviously it was a great breeding ground for lots of bands.
And to sort of add to that, it seems to me that in a pre-Kindle world, so many more folks were reading books. You seem to have a wide berth of novels and such. So I think the level of lyric writing was far superior as well.
I suppose so. People certainly read more, and that's surely a good thing. There were less distractions, of course, to reading. Reading was something that you did all the time when you had some free time. I didn't have a TV for years, so I just read. You know, you didn't have, you know, computer distractions, you know, Facebook distractions. You went on your phone every 5 minutes. So I think people did a lot more reading and a lot more dreaming, really. You know, I noticed people on journeys, people on a train or something, everyone's on their phone, and no one's looking out the window. I just look out the window because I just love to see the world go by, and look at the trees and the fields and the buildings and all that sort of stuff, you know. Or, you know, I'll read a book, one or the other. But the last thing I want to do is be on my phone.
I have a 16-year-old, and it's an interesting concept, reading anything that has nothing to do with school, if you know what I mean. And I remember back then I would read all the time, even with TV. It was something you did, and it just seems to, well, with most of the music of today, which, you know.
There you go, David.
you know.
It's one of those things. It's to have insight into other human beings. Like a novel is a good way of obtaining that insight. The cinema is another one. But they're very different forms, and you get different kinds of access from those. But I mean, certainly, I think you need books to understand people, really, and to understand history, and to understand different human situations. Not everything is covered by cinema. Not everything can be described. The inner workings of people can't always be described cinematically. You can kind of watch people's faces, and you can watch an actor kind of expressing subtle things, but a novel will actually describe someone's thought process and someone's emotional state. I think it's important to have that, really, to understand the human condition, and to find out about life.
Yeah, good point. And of course, you mentioned cinema. You were a fan of the French New Wave. As a matter of fact, Belmondo seems to have entered the book as well.
Well, he did. Well, when I was a teenager, I mean, pretty from about the age of 14, we just go every single week. We go to the cinema in London that showed the Continental films, and so all these great films from the 60s and even the 50s. So we're watching Italian, French, Scandinavian, German, cinema. A lot of it experimental, a lot of it just cutting edge stuff, and just wonderful stuff. And a lot of that has really stayed with me through the years. I mean, I still rewatch some of those films, and I'm just gobsmacked at how good they are. Technically, that they've probably been surpassed many times, but in terms of what they're saying and the emotion in those films, I mean, it's just staggeringly good stuff.
You mentioned the British films. I'll tell you a funny story. Being an American kid growing up, the first time I saw the 39 Steps, it dawned on me that there was a Foley artist. Oh, you could actually hear the footsteps. Where if you look at 50s and early 60s American film, it was completely quiet.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, that's good. Excuse me. While I cough. That's a good film.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great film. Love it.
Now, in the process of writing this book, Richard, I mean, you don't keep diaries. You don't keep journals. How was it for you? Did you go online to research yourself to fill in some of the blanks, perhaps?
I had to, yeah. It was a joy and fairly easy to write the anecdotal stuff, to write the stories. Stringing them together was very problematic because I had no time scale. I had no chronological reference of when a lot of stuff happened.
Right.
So I had to go to websites where they claim to have every Fairport gig ever, which they don't, but they claim they do. So there's still holes. Sure. And then I just had to rely on other people's books, other websites, to try to put it all together. And I had amazing editors too, that would do a lot more research than I did, and would actually nail stuff down incredibly well. I was quite amazed at how accurately they could put a time frame on things. So that was very useful.
Yeah. What role did Scott play? I know Scott's passed on, but you started this project with him, didn't you?
Yeah, well, it was Scott's idea to do a memoir about that time period, and he bugged me, and I said, oh, well, okay, let's let's try an interview process and see how that works. So he'd interview me, and then he'd write it up, and I kind of not recognized myself in what he sent back. So I said, look, this really isn't working. Let me write it, and then you come in at the end, and you can help me to shape it, edit it, etc. But sadly, Scott passed away before that could happen. Right.
But were there any, I know you stop in 1975. Is there any particular reason? Does life get boring after 1975 that you don't want to document it?
Yeah, it gets very boring. Well, in 1976, I think, as I mentioned, the kind of afterword to the book,
Yeah.
I was really pretty much not playing music for a year
Right.
and did other things. And when I came back to it, I didn't think we made very good records, and I didn't want to write sort of negatively about the next 3-4 years. And things don't really pick up again until 81, when we did what was described as the Tour from Hell.
Right.
And then, do I really want to write about that? I don't know. Maybe someone else will write that book. So that's the reason I stopped. And after that time period, when you're young, things are happening to you for the first time. We're releasing 3 albums in 1969. I mean, it's a very intense
That's
time.
amazing.
Yeah, it really is intense. And after that, things spread out more. So if I was going to take anecdotes from the next 20, 30 years, it would only be 250 pages. So it's just not as intense. And perhaps if it was that intense, I'd be dead by now. I mean, it was you can do it when you're young.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
One of the things that really brought me back, in a nutshell, my sister was good friends with Tony Hicks of the Hollies, Eddie Hardin, and Jim McCarty. So when she would travel to England, she'd bring back all these melody makers, and new music expresses, and I would, as a kid, cut stuff out. I have a scrapbook full of all of that.
Wow.
So when you mention people like the Albion Country Band, I had those records. I had Martin Carthy, and Soft Machine, Kevin Ayers. It was interesting. We did a interview with Rick Wills, and he would talk a little bit about Kevin Ayers. But you really captured that period in time so well, or at least as well as an American kid reading New Music Express and Melody Maker would think. It really, and of course, I was so much of an Anglophile. I bought Hapsash, so obviously I would have bought. But actually, I thought it was hashish, but that was another thing entirely. So whatever, but and of course, there was a moment in time when she brought back a red Noel Redding jacket, which may have been purchased at your sister's store. I'll never know. My sister has passed on, but there was so much synchronicity to reading that book, to how I envisioned all of it. For me, it was fabulous. And another quick story, in about, I guess it was 71, Sandy came to America to do a solo tour, and she played The Bitter End. However, it was the coldest night of the year, and only myself and a couple of friends went to the show. She did the whole show. It was beautiful. Then came out front and started chatting to us. And the best quote of the night was, she said, "Hey, have you guys heard of Monty Python?" I said, "No, what kind of music is it?"
Yeah. Well, there you go. I'll have to ask my sister about Noel's jacket. She did outfit Noel Redding. So it was red.
It was red. It was the cover of the American edition of "Are You Experienced" had that particular jacket on it.
Okay. There's a fair chance that was my sister's work.
Very interesting. Yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Wow.
Wasn't Granny Takes a Trip? That was the go-to rock and roll shop, wasn't that it?
It was the go-to, the hippie shop.
Oh, okay.
What to get your flared trousers and your, military cast-offs. I mean, there was another one called I Was Lord Kitchener's Valet, where they'd have old military jackets. Some of them extraordinarily beautiful. Hendrix used to wear this old, 19th century military thing. There were a lot of shops on the King's Road in those days. Right. Granny Takes the Trip. Yeah, it was interesting clothing scene. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think it's been as good since then. I think that was a very creative time for you know, well, it was a creative time for virtually everything.
Mm-hmm.
For God's sakes, you know, as you say, Mary Quant was really big and such. So yeah.
Richard, what has been the feedback from fans and your peers on the book?
Generally, surprisingly positive. I'm not being sued by anybody. This is good news. Swarb's widow was actually complimentary. I thought if anyone was going to give me a hard time about the way I described Dave Swarbrick in the book, you know, as being like someone I loved, but we had a kind of an antagonistic relationship. I thought, well, I wonder how that's going to go down with his widow. But she thought it was an accurate picture of Swarb, and she was glad that it was warts and all. So you know, so that's pretty good. Yeah, generally, you know, the reaction has been very good from friends. There's a couple of old bandmates I'm still waiting to hear from to see if there's any serious divergence of memory over a few incidents. There may be. But yeah, I mean, reviews have been great. Feedback from the public has been very good too.
Yeah, sure.
You know, there's always a few people who whine and say, you know, you aren't describing enough, you know, enough minor chords. You know, you know, there isn't enough insight into your playing technique. And I think, well, God, that's a book that sells about 6 copies. You know. It has to be a bit broader than that. And other people are saying, well, surely, you know, you kind of glossed over the breakup of your marriage with Linda. And so, well, actually, you know, that's outside the scope of the book. You know, the book finished in 75. But you know, there's always some people who complain about everything. But generally, it's been very well received, and you know, people whose insight I appreciate a lot have been complimentary, so it's good.
Right. And David, you were particularly enamored with the audio version, yes?
Oh yeah, you know, I read the book. I confess I read it on Kindle, but then the weather's been so nice. I've been driving. I live really in the hills, so I agree with you. I really like, and right now the greenery is just so vibrant. Mm-hmm. So I bought the audiobook. And so I was listening to it as I was traveling. I really enjoyed that.
No, I'm so glad to hear it. Yeah, it's a strange thing to doing an audiobook. There's you know, there's all kinds of things you have to think of. You know, you have to keep your voice at the same pitch for 10 days. You know, and some poor engineer has to cut out all the plosives. You know, and
well, after today, that's me. I do that with all
and also, you know, every time you open your mouth, you know, you make a little noise. You make all that, those kind of lip noises, and you have to be very careful about that sort of stuff, you know, as well. You know, so you know, to keep lubricated. Yeah, but in breath, all that sort of stuff, you know, that you wouldn't think of is problematic, and. But I was able to record it at home, which was great, in my home studio. So I didn't have to go anywhere. I could take my time, and that was all wonderful. And I have a wonderful sound engineer that travels on the road with me. So he did all the dirty work.
I know the dirty work. Yeah.
Must have been nice to hear yourself back telling your own story. That must be an interesting experience.
No, it's horrible. No, it's horrible hearing yourself back. Yeah. I think I did an okay job, but I wouldn't want to sit and listen to myself reading particularly.
See, David and I love listening to ourselves on the radio, don't we, David?
Well, to tell you the truth, for the hour that we spend, or the hour and a half that we spend, it takes me about 5 or 6 hours to edit it down. By that time, when we broadcast it, I press play, turn it on mute, and I have an alarm so that I know when to turn it off. I don't want to hear it at all.
Oh, absolutely. I don't blame you. Yeah, that's a tough one. Yeah.
But I tell you, it's great because another benefit of the pandemic is that we're able to talk to people that, you know, and on a normal day would probably be a little too busy to do it. So it's been a great benefit, and it's a wonderful thing, you know, to really explore all of that. And we will not talk about your minor chords. We will not even talk about ninth chords. So
we have to talk about ninth chord, half diminished chords, David.
Oh, this is your life, Richard Thompson. That's what this is going to be.
Well, if my life can be boiled down to a, you know, to a minor ninth, then I should be very happy. and it probably can.
So Richard, with the hopefully we're emerging out of COVID. Is it still a strict lockdown in London or no?
No, it's actually very optimistic right now. That there's like 0 deaths in the UK.
Right. Okay.
Hardly any cases whatsoever. So that they're slowly unlocking things. Next week, I think we get back to everything opening up: restaurants, museums, all that kind of stuff. And the target is June. That they're supposed to basically open up everything, and it's like life as normal. This depends on keeping the India variant at bay,
right?
And but things are looking very good right now.
All right, good. Now, when you do return to the stage, given that you've just put out the book, are you going to re-explore some of your earlier material or represent that? Include that in your set list?
Well, I think so. I mean, one of the things I'm going to do, certainly in the UK, the next thing I do in the UK is going to be a kind of part playing, part reading tour. You know, like in theaters, but I'll read a few extracts.
Okay.
And then play music that's you know, relevant to the period. And I mean, I play the old songs from time to time anyway.
Right, you do, yeah.
In my shows. So it won't be a total surprise to me or the audience, but yeah, I will be trying to theme things a little bit towards the 60s/70s.
Yeah, sure. And I've seen several of your solo shows. I saw several of the shows you did with Bonnie Raitt.
Oh, really? Yeah, great.
Yeah, with quite extraordinary on the west side there. And again, I guess, you know, interesting to revisit songs that you wrote 50 years ago. I know Bob Dylan, of course, Paul Simon put sort of a different twist on it. How does it feel singing something that you wrote when you were, you know, 19, 20?
It's a complicated feeling. Complicated. Yeah. On the one hand, I think, you know, you're proud of certain songs that you wrote a long time ago, and you thought, well, I did pretty well there. If you're going to sing it, then sometimes you have to forgive your own naivety.
Yeah.
And you think, well, I don't have that worldview anymore. I just think differently from whoever that person was. So you have to find different kinds of emotion in the song if you're going to perform it. So I have to really look at that. Some songs I won't perform because I can't find the connection to them anymore.
Right.
But you know, I'm reasonably proud of a lot of the Fairport stuff. I think some of that's really good. Yeah. Some of the Fairport albums, some of the albums I did with Linda, you know, stuff from that era. I think a lot of that holds up actually very well, and I'm not ashamed. There are things I'm ashamed of, but I'm not ashamed of those.
And of course, David, we need to talk about Richard's bass players, and you have had some remarkable players: Pat Donaldson, David Pegg, of course, who you've done many records with. Bruce Lynch, who did the original bass part on She Twists the Knife Again. Don't forget that. And Jerry, how about working? Tell me about working with Elvis's bass player. I mean, You, Me, Us, Mirror Blue, Rumor and Sigh, Amnesia, Daring Adventures. He did quite a few records with you.
Yeah, he was. He's a wonderful player. Yeah, he was Mitchell Froome's go-to bass player, and for good reason. You know, if people don't know Jerry, he was a very accomplished session player.
Absolutely.
From the LA session scene. You know, in the '60s, you know, played on things like Along Comes Mary,
the Association,
by the Association.
Yeah.
Yeah, but played on the Holy Mackerel album, which is a wonderful album, a bit obscure, and was in Elvis Presley's band. He kind of swapped out with
Norbert Putnam was it?
Norbert Putnam.
No,
I
it was
think.
the other one. Emery Gordy, swapped out with
Oh,
Emery
Emery
Gordy.
Gordy, of course, another guy.
The,
Yeah.
the, yeah, you know, so he'd be in for a few years, then Emery would do it for a few years, and they go backwards and forwards. But Jerry's just great. I mean, a really interesting, very creative player. He's one of those bass players that when the track's finished, you're humming the bass line. You know, forget the melody. The thing that catches your ear is the bass line. Yeah, he was that good and that interesting. You know, would use different basses for different effects. You know, you play down electro sometimes, but play the Fender sometimes.
Okay.
And just a great guy, and a few good Elvis stories, you know, here and
Oh,
there.
I would think so. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And he lives in Scotland now. I haven't seen him for a few years, but I think he married some Scottish heiress, as one does.
As one does. Good work if you can get it. Yeah. And then, of course, your long relationship with Danny Thompson.
Yeah, Danny, just kind of a unique acoustic bass player.
Yeah, sure.
Extraordinary player. I mean, he's played with so many different people on so many different records, in so many different styles. You know, he started out really as a kind of a bebop player, playing with probably the UK's top bebop musician at that time, Tubby Hayes, in the Tubby Hayes Quartet. But he also played with people like Josh White, you know, the old blues guys. Played with people like David Sylvian, you know, Kate Bush on Kate Bush records.
He has thousands of record credits. He's almost like Ron Carter is here. We spoke to Ron the other day, and yeah, Danny's resume is incredible.
Yeah, it's incredible. And of course, he was in Pentangle, which were a very sort of groundbreaking, you know, kind of folk / jazz band, I suppose you'd say, with Bert Jansch and John Ramborn, etc. And probably, you know, missed his career as a stand-up comedian. I mean, Danny's one of the funniest people on the planet, absolutely hilarious. And kind of an outrageous personality, you know, larger than life. You know, heart the size of a planet, and just you know, incredible stories. You know, his life has just been fascinating.
You have to get a hold of him, David.
Yeah, we will have to try.
And you should. Yeah, he'd be great to interview. You know, and I'll ask him about throwing Roy Harper off the ferry.
Oh.
see if he remembers that one. Yeah.
Does Roy Harper know how to swim? Well, he must.
No, he didn't.
There you go.
And, but it happened. It was an incident that happened.
Were you there? Did you witness it?
No, I wasn't there. It was you know, Pentangle, you know, were on their way to a festival, I think in Scandinavia somewhere, where you often have to take a lot of ferries, and Roy Harper was kind of doing the same trip, you know, and I think Roy must have been pontificating a bit about his own genius, and Danny said, well, if you don't shut up, you're going over the side. And Roy must have continued it, because Danny said, all right, that's it. And he chucked him off the ferry. I think as Roy is hitting the water, he said, I can't swim. and I believe Danny said, well, you should have thought of that first, shouldn't you?
That may actually be our calling card to get him.
Yes.
Could be.
Yeah. Why would you talk bass with Danny Thompson? Just talk about that. And then, interestingly, he used Willie Weeks on First Light with Andy Newmark and Neil Larson. What prompted you to get Willie and those guys on the record?
Well, it kind of came as a package. I was doing a record. You know, I was playing in the rhythm section behind a British singer called Julie Covington, who was kind of singer-actress, who had a big hit with Don't Cry For Me Argentina. Had a big hit in the UK with that tune from Evita. And she's also, you know, on primetime TV in this kind of, you know, sitcom called Rock Follies. And so I was drafted into the rhythm section. So it's me and Willie Weeks and Neil Larson on keyboards and Andy Newmark on drums.
Right.
And you know, it seems to be going well, and we seem to hang together quite well as a rhythm section. So Joe Boyd said, can you guys stay another week and we'll do Rich's record? So that's really how it happened. It wasn't like I said, you know, I have to have Willie Weeks. It was like the package. But he's a fantastic player. I mean, probably a bit too funky, really, for my music. But you know, and it was sort of a bit disco in those days. So the record sounds a little bit disco. But it was fun to work with those guys. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Andy Newmark said, yeah, when I spoke to him on the phone, he said, you know the number you just dialed? I said, yeah. He said, that's the fee.
Well, sure. Well, those guys were the top
They
LA
were,
guys.
yeah. They were great players, great players. And
Hopefully the first number wasn't 9.
So, sorry, say again?
Hopefully the first number wasn't a 9.
Yeah, I don't think it was, but no, good point.
And then, of course, Taras has played on many of your records as well. I think he was on, he's on Dreamatic. He's on lots of your records.
Yeah, Taras, a wonderful player. Taras is all about feel.
Okay.
You know, and with Michael Jerome as the drummer, I just love the feel of those two guys together. It's just fantastic. Obviously, I'm very happy because they've been in my band now for 15 years plus,
Yeah.
And I've used them on every record I can. So yeah, Taras used to play with Lucinda Williams, and
Right, yeah.
I used to play with Dwight Yoakam.
Yeah.
So he came more from a kind of country end of things, but he can play anything. It's just a great player.
Now I know you read the Burt Wheaton book, right? That was your back in the day, right? What was it? Play guitar in a day.
Playing a day. Everybody read that book.
Okay.
But if you asked, Jimmy Page or something, Eric Clapton, all these people, how did you get started? They'd say, oh, play in a day. And you could play in a day. This is a very clever little book.
Yeah.
That really kind of encouraged you in small steps and gave you confidence.
Okay.
And you could actually achieve, like in a day, you could achieve in a week, like you're halfway through the thing, and probably in a month you finish that and you've moved on to something else. You're already in the charts by the time you finish the book. Yeah, it's and it was written by this really kind of square, hokey guy, Burt Wheaton, who was just is on variety shows, but playing the guitar, just the squarest guy you can imagine.
Well, he's so square, he's cool, because I see he's parodied on a lot of British television.
Oh, is he? Well, he deserves it. Yeah.
But another topic David and I get into is music education. David studied at Berkeley. I went to University of Miami. Are you the type of band leader that kind of gives his rhythm section specific directions, or do you just hire guys because, like you said, their feel and what they bring to the table?
Well, I think it's a bit of both. I think I tend to send demos out to the band.
Okay.
And then they come back, sometimes with other ideas.
Okay.
So, and I don't impose myself too much on them. So sometimes I'll say, well, this is getting away from what I thought it should be. But other times I'm usually happy for their contribution. There was a classic case, I think 2 albums ago, or was it the last album, where I sent a demo that I thought was in 3/4.
Okay.
And they came back playing it, starting on beat 2 in 6/8. And having learned it that way, that they were unable to hear it any other way. So I said, okay, you keep doing what you're doing. I'll do what I'm doing. And I think it will mesh together. So it's got this weird rhythm. There's like two rhythms. And if you kind of, to turn the stereo all the way to the left, you hear it in 6/8. If you turn the stereo all the way to the right, it's in 3/4. It's just bizarre, but it sort of works. It's real kind of.
What track is that? What track is that?
God, I'm trying to think of the name. What's it called? It's called. I should know the names of my own songs, but I really do. It's called. She was meant for me.
Okay.
Her love was meant for me. That's what it's called. Her love was meant for me. And it might be on the most recent record now. I think about it. I think it's on 13 Rivers. Yeah.
All right. Okay. I'll have to
Yeah.
check that out. All right.
But it's in two rhythms at the same time. It almost sounds like one of those really complex African things, you know, where you're never quite sure where the one is, you know.
You know, it's interesting. One of the things about British music that's always intrigued me, and I think really in some respects the Beatles brought it, was the music hall quality. Ray Davies is a big proponent of that as well. And you have such a connection to earlier musics where over here, it seems a lot more, all right, that's over and done, we go on to the next thing. Oh, that's over and done, we go on to the next thing. And the reason I bring this up is you released a record of really old music. It was a compendium of, oh, hold on one second. Godfrey, our dog, needs to go out. Just one moment. Come on, buddy.
I see who really runs things around there. Yes.
Yes, the dog's running. I think the dog should do the interviews personally, but David insists on us doing them.
Limited vocabulary.
It's the wife that runs things. I always wanted to do a show of bass player wives talking about their husbands.
Yes.
Ooh. Actually, I've always found that in bands, it's often the bass player who's the raver, who's the one, the wild guy, you know.
Oh, really?
The one who's always up partying. The one often gets the girls as well.
Absolutely.
I be the bass player. You know, I could mention Danny Thompson as being one of those examples. Pat Donaldson as well. I mean, another wonderful bass player. But you mentioned in passing. What was absolutely, like, you know, one of the loudest people I've ever really worked with. You know, like boisterous personality, but lots of fun and a great player.
And then Ashley, of course, was a fabulous player.
Actually, it was a great player. Yeah, he didn't quite fit the bill. Okay, forget that analogy. Yeah, Ashley was a bit more intellectual and quiet, but Ashley was a band leader. I mean, that was kind of his role. His father was a band leader. So his father had a kind of jazz band. So yeah, Ashley was more the eminence grise, the planner, the thinker.
Okay.
So no, just to get back, tell me about that recording. Why you felt the need to release something that really was so much more of a compendium of materials from the past.
Well, it was a show that we did. You're talking about the 1,000 Years of Popular Music?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. That was a show that we did. I did it originally at the Getty Museum, and it seemed to go down well. So we did it as a tour. We did about 3 or 4 tours of it, and I just thought it was an interesting idea to go back and look at earlier music forms, going back to literally 1000 AD, and see what we could find back there, and then work our way through the centuries. And we discovered lots of things. We discovered lots of really great music that had been fairly neglected. Things became more familiar as we got into the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s maybe. But even then, we were finding more obscure songs like what we do, See My Friends by the Kinks, rather than one of their hits. We were doing things where we felt we could do a good interpretation of them, and we were really trying to uncover and polish some jewels from the past. And I think we partly succeeded in doing that. So much music gets left behind on the trash heap of history, and going back and looking at stuff, you think, well, that's a great idea. It's a shame that idea died away. Perhaps we could revive that. you know, and you look at a song, perhaps a song by the troubadours from the 12th century, and you think that that's a really interesting verse structure. What a shame that people don't do that anymore. You know, people don't think in those terms anymore. So there was all kinds of things to discover, pretty interesting stuff that we kind of unveiled, and it was just a lot of fun to play it as well. Great fun to play it.
Well, because it's interesting, because, you know, one of the feelings I get from reading the book is that you were all a bunch of ethnomusicologists just trying to, you know, discover new things or old things for that matter.
Yeah, I think we were. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a professional ethnomusicologist, but as amateurs, I think we absolutely were. And Fairport always had this sort of idealistic bent where we didn't want to sound like other people. We wanted to be, you know, different from other bands. So even when we were playing American music styles, you know, we'd find old jug band songs, or we'd find stuff from the 20s, or we'd find obscure Dylan songs instead of popular Dylan songs.
Right.
You know, we were always really scraping around and looking for obscurities, and we thought that made us very cool. And to some extent, perhaps it did.
It worked. Well, it's interesting too, because one of Tom's friends, Sal Maida, who was the bass player in Roxy Music, is releasing, or did it just come out?
He's putting out a book about 100 albums that bombed that you have to know. So we'll have to get that to you.
The title.
Exactly.
And lastly, Richard, your thoughts on when you hear other artists interpret your work, Johnny Cash, the Neville Brothers, REM. Any particular rendition? I know you'll love my version of She Twists the Knife, but
I shall.
Any Richard Thompson covers that you really treasure, that you think, yeah, they really nailed it?
Bonnie Raitt did a great cover of Dimming the Day. Emmylou did a great cover. But I can talk about more obscure people, probably. You know, a band called Swan Arcade did a great version of Great Valerio, which is hard to find these days. I mean, generally, I'm really thrilled when people cover my songs, and generally happy. You know, if people do a literal copy, sometimes I think, well, they haven't really added anything.
Right.
Sometimes you hear it, a version of a song, and you think, well, you know, I think they missed the point of the song. You know, it's a nice, pleasant sounding thing, but they missed the real grit of it. You know, the inner core of it. But generally, I mean, it's a delight to hear people you know, throwing your song back at you in that sense, and it's a good feeling, like when your peers, you know, your musical peers, like what you do. That's a great feeling.
All right. Okay. Well, great. Your neighbor Cindy Staghoff sends her regards to you. And,
okay, yeah, get that.
David, anything we'd like to wrap up with?
No, I'm thrilled that you spent the time with us. What we
My pleasure.
Is I'll edit the stuff up, and then we'll just spend some time playing some of your music from Vaughan Williams on up.
That'd be lovely. Oh, thank you. That'd be brilliant.
Radio, and we're looking forward to seeing you back on the bandstand in the US of A. And
well, stuff's coming back. You know, I mean, it is happening slowly, which is great.
Yeah, New York is starting to open up a little bit. So I think by July, David, we're fully open, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Thank God.
Yeah.
That would be great. Yeah, I've got some outdoor stuff on the East Coast in June, Jersey.
About 4 miles from my house.
Yeah.
Hopefully even closer than that.
That'd be wonderful.
We're trying. Yeah, you just have to speak to my agent and see what he can.
I will. I'll give him my
for you.
You seem to have room on the couch in the back there, David. So I mean,
that's true.
Plenty of play there, Richard. There you can. You're welcome.
There you go. Yeah, absolutely. All right. You know the number you just dialed.
All right. Hey, Richard, thanks for taking
the Z.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much. That was
All
really
right.
fun. Real pleasure. Absolute
All
pleasure.
right. Be well. See you soon.
All right. Same to you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, David. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye now.